From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Vladimir Putin unleashes a second day of missile attacks on Ukrainian cities targeting civilian infrastructure as he escalates in response to the Ukrainian success on the battlefield in the last month. The G7 leaders, in turn, hold an emergency video conference on Ukraine on Tuesday as they consider how to respond to the latest Russian attacks and the new requests by Vladimir Zelensky, president of Ukraine, for additional aid, in particular air defenses. Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot. We're going to have an assessment here from all of us about where the Ukrainian war stands now and whether or not we are at some new hinge point in the war. And I'm here with my colleagues Joe Sternberg, operating out of London, and Jillian Melcher here in the States, but who has traveled to Ukraine to cover the conflict since the invasion in February 24th of this year and has frequent contact with sources inside Ukraine, including in the Ukrainian military. All right, let's talk about the status of the war first. The Ukrainian advances we've all read about, significant symbolic success on the weekend. Ukraine hasn't taken credit for it, but it was the explosion of the Kerch Bridge between Russia proper and Crimea, the main access point for supplying Crimea, which otherwise is isolated from Russia. Of course, there are naval ways to get supplies there, but this is the main land way to get support there. And it's something of a Russian landmark. Putin took great pride in it, and yet it was disabled in an explosion. As I said, the Ukrainians haven't taken credit for it, but Vladimir Putin has blamed Ukraine for it, and it's not as if the Ukrainians aren't pleased about it. Heavily symbolic, able to strike inside if the Ukrainians did do it, whether it was through an explosion under the water or an explosion, truck bomb, as the Russians claim, or some kind of missile attack. It seems to have had real psychological effect on Putin and his support at home, Jillian.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So Crimea is hugely significant symbolically, both to Russia and Ukraine. This is the first territory that Russia annexed. And so taking out this it's literally a way of attacking the connection between Russia and Crimea. Now, this strike on the bridge, it's something that it looks likely that they'll be able to repair it. But it does make a psychological blow here. And I think that what it's suggesting is that Crimea may be vulnerable to Ukrainian attack. And, if they can take out that bridge and disable it for good, that puts Crimea in a pretty difficult situation because the only other way to get things in by land is to go through that occupied territory, along the Black Sea in the south of Ukraine. But a lot of that is within the range of Ukrainian artillery. And so I think it's potentially threatening those supply lines in a way that just has a real psychological impact. It's something that the Russians did not anticipate that the Ukrainians could pull off.
Well, Crimea is not right now under immediate threat except for the occasional explosion or assassination, as I understand it. I mean, Ukraine has struck targets in Crimea before, either with sabotage or with the odd missile attack, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think what Ukrainians are saying, though, is that this is not off limits. And in addition to that, if you'll just look at public statements, they're saying we want to take back all of occupied territory, and that includes Crimea.
And that, of course, is even more precious to Russia than the Donbass region that it took in the second stage of its invasion in 2014. Okay, then Putin in response has unleashed new missile attacks on Ukraine, first Monday and now Tuesday again, with attacks that seem aimed at civilian infrastructure and particularly electricity plants to turn the lights off in Ukrainian cities. They don't seem to be aimed at military targets, although the Russians claim they are, but they have hit civilian sites. They've hit buildings where civilians live and even playgrounds and rush hour traffic where children are playing or commuters are going to work. Let's listen to the response inside Ukraine to this, first by a restaurant worker, Olya Pankracheva, and then by a representative of the human rights group in Ukraine that recently won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Hi, I'm all right. We're all right. Just donating hardly. And nobody is scared no more. We are just angry.
We ask international community to recognize Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. We ask international community to provide Ukraine the modern air defense systems.
Joe Sternberg, the goal of the missile attacks seem to be several. One is to Putin placate his critics at home who claim he's not doing enough to stop the Ukrainian advances and to disrupt life inside Ukraine. Two, with the goal of disrupting that life aimed at electrical power, which, of course, creates new hardships, not just turning the lights off, but across the entire Ukrainian economy. With winter coming, colder temperatures, abilities to operate some heating and industry. It is, in some quarters, people think that such attacks on civilian infrastructure amounts to a war crime because it's not at a military target. But the Putin goal seems to be to extract maximum pain on the Ukrainian people.
Well, and don't underestimate the extent to which merely doing something can be a Putin aim here. And I think that that's kind of an important piece of this picture that's been unfolding over the past couple of days is the fact that, Putin is in the situation where he is not having great success at all when he engages directly with the Ukrainian military. And I think the reality of the situation right now, especially as he's struggling to mobilize all of these conscripts in Russia itself, is that it would have been very difficult for him to mount any sort of convincing military-to-military response to whatever it is that has happened on that bridge in Crimea. And so I think that he also presumably has felt that he can't allow that bridge episode to go unanswered. And so he's doing the thing that's available to him, which is these attacks on civilian targets. And I think that that is a sign of the stress that he is under at the moment, particularly because, going back to a point that Jillian made a couple minutes ago, I mean, this notion of the Ukrainians saying that they do not view Crimea as off limits here. I mean, one consequence of the attack on the bridge is that it has now expanded again the field on which this conflict is being fought at a time when it would really benefit Putin to contract the level of military engagement somewhat to a more manageable proportion for him. And so I read the attacks on the civilian centers also as saying, well, look, I can expand the battlefield for my side as well. The difference is that he does that by attacking the civilian targets.
And Jillian, if the goal is to demoralize Ukrainian citizens, which it clearly is, then there doesn't seem to be a lot of success there. At least there hasn't been over the previous months, despite bombing of many civilian targets. And you talked to Ukrainians, and we heard those two clips. There doesn't seem to be any flagging of determination to resist Putin and continue with the war effort.
Yeah, none at all. And just to give you some context on that restaurant worker, she's 24 years old. Right after February 24th, when the full invasion began, she joined the territorial defense. She's real petite, but is willing to fight for her country. And that sentiment that she said, that we're not even scared anymore, this just makes us angry, this makes us more determined, is something that I consistently hear when I talk to Ukrainians. I think they're very much encouraged by the success of the counteroffensive. If you look back in last month around Kharkiv Oblast, how much territory they've reclaimed, I think it's been excellent for Ukrainian morale in the same way it's been terrible for Russian morale. And so I think the will to fight is growing stronger. The interesting thing is, in the West, there's been a lot of talk in recent weeks about Putin's nuclear saber rattling. And when I talk to my Ukrainian sources about it, they say, yeah, this is a possibility. It's something to take seriously. But we've known it was a possibility since we decided to not submit and take on a nuclear power. And I think their concern now is that they're willing to endure whatever difficulties come this winter. I think they're concerned about whether the West is as on board as their people.